It's going to be a long one. What the Moon Saw, 1839 to 1840. Introduction. It is a strange thing that when I feel most fervently and most deeply, my hands and my tongue seem alike tied, so that I cannot rightly describe or accurately portray the thoughts that are rising within me. And yet I am a painter. My eyes tell me as much as that, and all my friends who have seen my sketches and fancies say the same. I am a poor lad, and I live in one of the narrowest of lanes. But I do not want for light, as my room is high up in the house with an extensive prospect over the neighboring roofs. I lost my place, sorry. Wow. I completely lost my place. During the first few days, sorry about that, I went to live in the town. I felt low-spirited and solitary enough. Instead of the forest and the green hills of former days, I had here only a forest of chimney pots to look out upon, and then I had not a single friend, not one familiar face greeted me. So one evening I sat at the window in a desponding mood, and presently I opened the casement and looked out. Oh, how my heart leaped up with joy. Here was a well-known face at last. A round, friendly countenance, the face of a good friend I had known at home. In fact, it was the moon that looked in upon me. He was quite unchanged, the dear old moon, and had the same face exactly that he used to show when he peered down upon me through the willow trees on the moor. I kissed my hand to him over and over again as he shone far into my little room, and he, for his part, promised me that every evening when he came abroad he would look in upon me for a few moments. This promise he faithfully kept. It is a pity that he can only stay such a short time when he comes. Whenever he appears, he tells me of one thing or another that has been seen on the previous night or on that same evening. Just paint the scenes I described to you, this is what he said to me, and you will have a very pretty picture book. I have followed his injunction for many evenings. I could make up a new 1,001 nights in my own way out of these pictures, but the number might be too great after all. The pictures I have here given have not been chosen at random, but follow in their proper order, just as they were described to me. Some great gifted painter or some poet or musician may make something more of them if he likes. What I have given here are only hasty sketches, hurriedly put upon the paper with some of my own thoughts interspersed. For the moon did not come to me every evening. A cloud sometimes hid his face from me. First evening. Last night, these are the moon's own words, I glided through the sky, the clear sky of India, and reflected myself in the Ganges. My rays struggled to force their way through the thick roof of the old sycamore tree that arched beneath me like the shell of a tortoise. From the thicket, a Hindu maiden stepped out, graceful as a gazelle and beautiful as Eve. There was something truly spiritual and yet material about her, and I could even make out her thoughts beneath her delicate skin. The thorny liana plants tore her sandals, but she walked rapidly forward. The wild beasts that came up from the river after quenching their thirst fled away in fright. For the maiden held a lighted lamp in her hand. I could see the blood in the delicate fingers arched into a shield over the flame of the lamp. She walked down to the river, then placed the lamp on the surface, and it drifted away with the current. The flame flickered back and forth as if it wanted to expire, but still it burned as the maiden's dark, sparkling eyes followed it with a soulful gaze from beneath the long silken lashes of her eyelids. She knew that if the lamp should burn as long as her eyes could follow it, her lover would still be alive, but if it went out, he would be dead. As the lamp burned and trembled, the heart of the maiden burned and trembled. She knelt and prayed. Beside her a deadly snake lurked in the grass, but she thought only of Brahma and of her bridge groom. "He lives!" she shouted joyfully, and the echo answered from the mountains. "He lives!" Second evening. It was yesterday, the moon told me, that I peeped into a little courtyard enclosed by houses. There was a hen there with 11 chickens. A pretty little girl was playing around them. The hen clucked and spread out her wings in fright over her chicks. Then the little girl's father came and scolded her, and I passed on, thinking no more of it. But this evening, just a few minutes ago, I again peeped into the same yard. It was very quiet there. But soon the little girl came out, crept cautiously to the hen house, lifted the latch, and stole softly up to the hen and chickens. They clucked loudly and fluttered about with the little girl running after them. I saw it plainly, for I peeped through a hole in the wall. I was very angry with the naughty child, and was glad when the father came and caught her by the arm and scolded her, still more sternly than yesterday. She bent her head down, and her big blue eyes were filled with tears. "What are you doing here anyway?" he asked. "I want to go in and kiss the hen and beg her to forgive me for yesterday," she wept, "but I was afraid to tell you." Then the father kissed the innocent child's forehead. I kissed her eyes and lips. Third evening. In the narrow lane close by, it is so narrow that my rays can slide down the walls of the houses for only a moment, and yet in that moment I see enough to understand the little world stirring below. I saw a woman. 16 years ago she was a child, and out in the country she used to play in the old parsonage garden. The rosebush hedges were old, and their blossoms had fallen. They had run wild and grew rankly over the paths, twisting their long branches up the trunks of the apple trees. Here and there, a rose still sat on her stem. Not so lovely as the queen of the flowers usually appears, but the color was still there, and the fragrance too. The clergyman's little daughter seemed to me a much lovelier rose as she sat on her stool under the straggling hedge and kissed her doll with the caved-in pasteboard cheeks. 10 years later I saw her again. I saw her in a splendid ballroom, and she was the beautiful bride of a rich merchant. I was happy over her good fortune and sought her again in the silent nights. Alas, no one then heeded my clear eye, my trusty watch. My rose also grew up in the rank wilderness, like the roses in the parsonage garden. Life in the everyday world has its tragedies too, and tonight I witnessed the final act. In the narrow street, deathly ill, she lay upon her bed, and the wicked, rough, and cruel landlord, now her only acquaintance, tore away her blanket. "Stand up," he said. "Your cheeks are enough to frighten anyone. Dress yourself. Get some money, or I'll throw you into the street. Get up and hurry." "Death is in my breast," she cried. "Oh, let me rest." But he dragged her up, painted her cheeks, put roses in her hair, set her at the window with a lighted candle beside her, and went away. I stared at her. She sat there motionless. Though her hand fell down into her lap, the wind pushed against the window until it broke a pane, but still she did not move. The curtain fluttered about her like a flame. She was dead. There at the open window sat the dead one, as a preachment against sin, my rose from the parsonage garden. Fourth evening. Last night I saw a German play, the moon said. It was in a small town, where a stable had been converted into a theater. That is to say, the stalls were still there, but had been fitted up as boxes, and all the woodwork was covered with colored paper. From the low roof hung a small iron chandelier. An inverted tub was fastened over it so that, as in real theater, the lights could be drawn up with the prompter's bell tinkled. Ting-a-ling, and the little iron chandelier skipped up half a yard. This was the sign that the play was about to begin. A young nobleman and his lady who happened to be passing through the town were present at the performance, and consequently the house was filled to capacity. The space directly under the chandelier, however, was as clear as a small crater. Not a soul sat there, for the candles of the chandelier dripped down. Drip, drip. I could see everything that happened, for it was so hot that the windows were left open, and at every window the servants could be seen peeping in from the outside. Now, the constables were posted inside the door and threatened the intruders with their sticks. The young noble pair sat close to the orchestra in two old armchairs, which were usually occupied by the burgomaster and his wife. But tonight, they had to sit on the wooden benches like the rest of the townspeople. "I look there now," one woman whispered to another. "One sparrow hawk in turn out flies another." Everything took on a more dignified aspect on this memorable occasion. The chandelier hopped. The mob outside got their knuckles rapped, and yes, the moon was present too through the whole performance. Fifth evening. "Yesterday," said the moon, "I looked down on the busy city of Paris, and my gaze penetrated into the apartments of Louvre. An old grandmother, poorly clad, for she belonged to the class of beggars, followed one of the attendants into the great empty throne room. She had to see it, and it had cost her many a little sacrifice and many a fawning word before she managed to make her way this far into the palace. She folded her scrawny hands and gazed around as solemnly as if she were in a church. 'It was here,' she said, 'here.' And she approached the throne, from which the rich gold-edged velvet covering hung down. 'There,' she said, 'there.' And she fell to her knees and kissed the purple hanging. I believe she wept. 'It wasn't this velvet,' said the attendant, a smile playing on his lips. 'But it was here,' said the woman, 'and it looked the same then.' 'The same and yet different,' replied the man. 'That day the windows were smashed in, the doors burst open, and the floor was red with blood. Yet you may truthfully say, my grandson died upon the throne of France.' 'Died,' repeated the old woman. I don't believe another word was spoken, and they soon left the hall. The evening twilight faded, and my beams streamed with greater brilliance on the rich velvet hangings of the throne of France. Now, who do you think the old woman was? I shall tell you a story. It was during the Revolution of July, near the close of the evening preceding the most brilliant day of victory, when every house was a fortress, every window a barricade. The people stormed the Tuileries, even women and children fighting among the combatants. The mob forced its way through the halls and the apartments of the palace. A poor, ragged, half-gowned boy fought bravely in the ranks of his older comrades. Mortally wounded with several bayonet thrusts, he sank to the floor. This happened in the throne room, and the bleeding body was laid on the throne of France. His blood streamed over the royal purple hangings that partly covered his wounds. There was a picture. The magnificent room, the mob of fighting rebels. A broken standard lay on the floor while the tricolor waved over the bayonets, and on the throne lay the beggar lad. With his pale, glorified features, his eyes turned heavenward, his limbs stiffening in death, his naked breast and his ragged coat were half hidden by the rich velvet hanging with its silver lilies. Perhaps at the boy's cradle that had been prophesied, he shall die upon the throne of France, and the mother's heart had dreamed of a second Napoleon. My rays have kissed the wreath of immortality on his grave. My beam last night kissed the brow of the old grandmother. When she saw in a dream the picture you may draw here, the poor ragged beggar boy on the throne of France. The sixth evening. I have been to Uppsala, the moon told me. I looked down on the great plain covered with coarse grass and on the barren fields. I saw my image in the river Pharis, while the steamer frightened away the fishes into the rushes. The clouds chased one another beneath me, throwing their long shadows upon the graves of Odin and Thor and Freya, as the hills there are called. The names have been cut in the thin turf that covers the hills. Here there is no memorial stone where the traveler can engrave his name, no rock wall wherein he can paint it. So the visitor cuts it into the turf, and the bare earth along the range of hills is covered with a network of letters and names, an immortality that lasts until the next growth of turf. Upon the hilltop a man stood, a poet. He emptied a mead horn decorated with a broad silver ring, and whispered a name that he charged the breezes not to betray. But I heard it, and I knew it. The coronet of a count sparkled above it, and the Therefore, he did not name it aloud. I smiled, for the crown of a poet sparkles above his. The name of Eleanor d'Este is with Tasso's. I too know where the rose of beauty blooms. Thus the moon spoke, but then a cloud passed between us. Oh, that cloud might never come between the poet and the rose. 7th evening. A fresh and fragrant grove of oaks and beeches, visited by 100 nightingales, with each return of spring, stretched along the seashore. The broad highway lies between this grove and the ocean, the ever-changing ocean. One carriage after another rolls past, but I do not follow them. My gaze rests mostly on one spot, a Viking's grave. Blackberry and sloe grow between the stones. Here is the true poetry of nature. How do you think people interpret it? Listen, and I shall tell you what I heard last evening and during the past night. First, 2 rich landowners came driving along. "What splendid trees," said one of them. "Every tree should give at least 10 cartloads of firewood," answered the other. "And we are going to have a hard winter. Last year, remember, we got $14 a load, and then they were gone." "What a terrible road," said another man as he drove past in his carriage. "It's all because of those confounded trees," his companion answered. "The only way for air to get in is from the sea," and they rolled on. The stagecoach also came by, and during this loveliest part of the journey, all the passengers were fast asleep. The driver blew his horn, but he said only to himself, "I blow well indeed. It sounds fine right here, but what do these sleepy people inside care about it?" Then the stagecoach disappeared. Now 2 young lads galloped along on horseback. Here are the fire and spirit of youth, I thought. They also glanced with a smile, at the moss-green hills and the dark grove. "I should certainly like to go for a walk in here with Christine, the miller's daughter," said one of them, and off they rode. The fragrance of flowers was very strong. Every breath of wind was still. The ocean seemed almost a part of the heaven that overhung the deep valley. A coach with 6 passengers rolled by. 4 were asleep. The 5th was thinking of how his new summer coat would fit him. And the 6th popped his head out of the window to ask the coachman if there was anything remarkable about the heap of stones beside the road. "No," said the driver. "That's nothing but a heap of stones, but the trees over there, they're really worth looking at." "Tell me about them." "Yes, they're most remarkable," said the man. "In the winter, when the snow is so deep that nothing can be seen, those trees are signposts to me. I follow them and keep from driving into the sea. You see, that's why they're so remarkable." And then he drove on. Now a painter came by. His eyes sparkled. He didn't say a word. He only whistled. Each nightingale sang more loudly and sweetly than the other. "Stop that noise," he cried, and then he carefully examined all the colors and tints in the landscape. Blue, purple, dark brown. What a beautiful painting this would make. His mind took it all in, just as a mirror reflects a picture, and meanwhile he whistled a Rossini march. The last to come by was a poor girl. She sat down upon the Viking's grave to rest and laid down her bundle. Her pale, lovely face turned around the grove, and she listened. Her eyes brightened as she raised them over the ocean toward the heaven. Her hands were clasped, and I believe she said the Lord's Prayer. She herself did not fully understand the feeling that moment in the scene around her. Will in her memory be invested with colors more beautiful and richer than the artist's accurate colors. My rays followed her until the dawn kissed her brow.